David Nation is Managing Director of Dairy Australia, and he says he's pretty impressed with how quickly that industry has been embracing the genetics in research.
It's always been a big part of dairy farming, and most farmers are really passionate about breeding, choosing bulls, thinking about their best cows. But the opportunity now with genomics, and the opportunity, for example, with the farmers in the room today that have been genomically testing some of their calves and young stock, the differences they're making in every generation is, we're talking about 3 times the pace of change as was happening only 10, 15 years ago.
So overall, you put a graph up on the screen today talking about some of the positives for dairy farmers in the industry at the moment. What were the main takeaways from that?
The opportunity space for dairy is that there's a really solid global demand for dairy. There's a really solid domestic demand for dairy as well. When we look at what's happened, obviously there's been price rises at the farm gate, but there's been price rises in retail as well, and the consumption trends are just so positive and demonstrate the depth of support and the importance of dairy in the diet. But like I was saying at the start as well, the sustained export capacity for dairy, the diet changes in Asia, the opportunities to export into Asia are still immense for Australia.
Sticking with what's going on overseas, there's been a lot of discussion in the European space about the right to farm. Can you just explain a bit about what's been going on with legislation over there and what it means for farmers?
It does mean different things across Europe, but the biggest impact on the dairy industry is their nitrogen directives and limiting the amount of nitrogen use and thinking about water quality. And for some countries, the only way they can meet those directives is to have less dairy farms, less dairy cows, less dairy production. And that's obviously causing a lot of tension in those countries. There's still a lot to happen before that's resolved.
Should Australian farmers be worried?
I think Australian farmers should watch what's happening, but I don't think they should be worried. I think we've got an outdoor-based dairy production system. We've got a sustainable production system that is very different to the European production system. We don't have to overwinter in houses like they do in Europe. So we are quite different in those ways, but I think everyone should be aware of where the limitations are in different continents. I mean, if nothing else, Australians need to understand it because Europe is still the biggest exporter of dairy products. So anything that happens in Europe is happening to the biggest trader of dairy in the world. As well as knowing what's happening there, it creates real opportunities to think if Europe produces less milk, what's Australia's future too? You
mentioned there about the fact that a majority of Australian dairy farmers are using pasture-based systems, but Dairy Australia recently released the national guidelines for dairy feed pads and contained housing. Why do you think that was necessary if most farmers are using pasture-based systems?
Well, what we're seeing, and what we've always seen, is a diverse range of production systems in Australia. And in many parts of Australia, for example, there's hybrid systems, where there's pasture-based for some times of the year and fully feeding mixed rations other times of the year. So it's relevant for a broader and broader group of farmers. And this guideline is many years of work in the making, and it's putting out best practice guidelines, for production systems that are going to be an important part of our future.
So has there been overall a trend away from pasture-based systems towards more of a sort of indoor-based system?
Region by region it differs. In some areas, like in northern Victoria and further north, there are more house systems, and I think we'll see more of that. And in other areas with more reliable rainfall, with secure irrigation systems, there's still a lot of pasture-based dairy farming. It'll continue to be that mix.
One of the takeaways I've had from today, in addition to the presentations when I've been speaking to farmers, number one concern seems to be labour shortages. Would you agree?
Labour is a constant conversation, but it's bigger than dairy and it's bigger than agriculture. Our challenge is how to make sure that we continue to attract people into the dairy industry in a time when it's genuinely hard to do so.
Interesting stuff, isn't it? David Nation is Managing Director of Dairy Australia. He was speaking there with Jane McNaughton.